It did not die in the boardroom. It did not die at the negotiation table. It died silently, at more than 10,000 meters in the air, inside the luxurious first-class cabin of Summit Skyways, where everything looked so perfect that nothing should have been able to fall apart. A $500 million deal, one that could have revived an airline slowly sinking under its own weight, was strangled by a single moment, so small it seemed absurd. And that tragedy began with something that should have been impossible: the silence of one man and the eyes of the people around him. Jordan Reed was not the kind of CEO who made a room go quiet with shouting. He was quiet, but it was that silence, steady and solid and deep, like granite, that made people cautious around him. At 40 years old, tall and composed in a charcoal grey tailored suit, Jordan carried the presence of someone who had spent his entire life fighting to exist in spaces where people like him were rarely expected to sit. The night before, as he left the Horizon Logic Systems office in San Francisco, he told his assistant, "Tomorrow I'm flying to Chicago. Not for the company. I need to speak with Professor Ellis." In his voice was something rare, a sincerity not meant for the corporate world, but for the roots of who he was. Professor Robert Ellis, the elderly man with silver hair and eyes bright enough to look through the universe itself, was the person who had lifted Jordan from a scholarship kid to an MIT prodigy. Today's meeting was a pilgrimage, a long overdue thank you after years of silence. And that was why Jordan placed himself in the first-class cabin of Summit Skyways Flight 451 this morning from Los Angeles to Chicago. A morning that seemed ordinary, but fate had other plans. The first-class cabin glowed softly under warm LED lights, the beige leather seats polished to a shine, the hot towels carrying a faint citrus scent, the quiet clink of crystal glasses kissing wooden trays. Jordan settled into seat 2A as if he had belonged there his entire life. No extravagance, no display. He simply opened his leather case and took out his worn copy of Meditations. Its edges frayed a reminder he always carried that the world could fall apart, but the mind must remain still. Emily Carter, the flight attendant assigned to first class, approached with a tired but genuine smile. "Good morning, Mr. Reed. What would you like before takeoff? Champagne or orange juice water?" "No ice, Jordan," answered his voice, low, warm and calm like the sea. Emily exhaled quietly. He was nothing like the first-class passengers who barked orders out of arrogance. He read her name on her badge and said gently, "Thank you, Emily." In that moment, Emily felt it clearly. This man was different. Not because of status, but because of the way he looked at people with eyes that listened. Jordan opened his book and skimmed a line he had underlined years ago. "You alone have control over your reactions. No one can take that from you." He had no idea that within minutes he would need that sentence more than ever. Loud footsteps and careless laughter shattered the gentle quiet of the cabin. Jordan looked up, and like a cold arrow cutting through the air, the presence of a young man stormed into the space. Tyler Briggs, 29 years old, wearing a blinding coral-pink polo, with the collar popped, as if announcing he belonged to some exclusive tier. A gold watch catching the light, a voice so loud every passenger heard him declare, "If the deal is under 9 figures, tell them not to bring it to me." Jordan watched him for a few seconds, then returned to his book. But he felt Tyler's eyes on him, a quick scan from head to toe that silently asked, "Why are you sitting here?" Then with a thud, Tyler threw his bag onto seat 2B as if it were his private property. "Hey, Tyler," called to Emily lazily. "I'm in seat 3D, but this seat is empty, right? I want to sit here." Emily stayed calm, trying to be gentle. "I'm sorry, sir, that seat is reserved for crew rest and we have to wait until all first-class passengers finish boarding," Tyler scoffed, waving her off. "Policy, policy. Always policy. Bring me a whiskey. A good one." In seat 2, Jordan turned another page, but his heartbeat shifted. Not from anger, but from recognition. He had seen this scene 100 times, people believing they deserved more than others, forgetting that a seat number did not measure a person's worth. As Emily returned with his water, Jordan sensed a faint unease rising. Something like a cold wind before a storm breaks. He looked up. Emily was smiling, but her eyes were telling another story. He did not yet know that this moment marked the beginning of a collapse within an airline, and the rise of a lesson the world would be forced to remember. Because within only a few minutes, a fabricated system error would challenge his dignity, expose the rotting core of a company's culture, and lead to a decision so cold it would shake the entire aviation industry. But for now, under warm, golden lights and the hum of engines preparing for departure, Jordan knew only one thing: this flight would not be peaceful, and it would change everything. Jordan had barely read another line when first class was pierced a second time by the loud burst of laughter erupting from Tyler Briggs in the row behind him. It was not the laugh of someone genuinely amused. It was the laugh of a man who believed the world existed to serve him, the laugh of someone who had never been denied anything in his entire life. His hand swung upward, the gold watch on his wrist, flashing under the cabin lights as if he wanted everyone to see it. "Emily, where's my whiskey?" Tyler barked, using the same tone one might use to shout at a waiter in a cheap restaurant. Emily flinched, but still smiled that familiar smile worn by people who survive on their ability to suppress their emotions. Jordan glanced at her, and in that brief instant, he sensed what Emily was trying so hard to hide: tension, guardedness, and the fear of making a single mistake in front of someone who looked connected. Tyler was not like the usual VIP passengers. The way he flipped his sleeve, the way he spoke, the way he claimed seat 2B, as if it belonged to him. Everything radiated the kind of power he had never earned, but believed was naturally his. Jordan closed his eyes for 1 second, not to avoid Tyler, but to hold on to his calm before things grew worse. He had seen men like this in boardrooms, on golf courses, at charity galas, men blessed too early by the world, until they believed they were playing a game where the rules only applied to everyone else. And Jordan knew one thing: men like Tyler always brought trouble. When Emily returned with the whiskey, Tyler did not bother to look at her. He flicked his hand dismissively, signaling her to leave the glass and disappear. But what caught Jordan's attention was not the gesture, it was the way Emily looked at seat 2B. Just a flash, just a fraction of a second, but enough for him to see the anxiety flicker in her eyes. That look told him this was more than a rude passenger. Something felt off. Something felt wrong. Boarding continued, the last few passengers entering with the sluggishness of an early morning. Jordan tried to refocus on his book, but his mind would not settle. He felt as if he were standing on the edge of something he did not want to witness, but fate kept pulling him closer. The engines began to hum, signaling that the cabin doors would soon close. Emily moved through the aisle for a final check professionalism wrapped around her like a fragile layer of armor. But when she reached Jordan, she paused for half a second, as if she wanted to say something. Then she swallowed it down. Mr. Reed, if you need anything else, just press the call button." Her voice was softer than what he sensed in her demeanor. He gave her a polite nod, but a cold certainty was already forming inside him. And right then the cabin door opened one last time. A middle-aged man rushed in, breathless, clearly having run from the gate. He dropped into seat 1D, officially closing the first-class manifest. Jordan exhaled quietly. All passengers were finally aboard. Everything should have been calm. But the footsteps behind him froze the entire cabin. Emily reappeared, but this time her face held none of its earlier steadiness. Walking behind her was a man with salt and pepper hair and a stern expression sharp enough to drop the cabin temperature. The name on his vest read, Frank Dalton Purser. Jordan looked up. He recognized the look immediately. It was the look of someone who had already made up his mind before speaking. Frank stopped beside Jordan, his voice as heavy as concrete. "Mr. Reed, we need to speak with you about your seat." Emily stood beside him, with her head lowered, as if she were too ashamed to breathe. Jordan closed his book and placed a finger between the pages, holding on to a moment of composure. "What seems to be the issue? The system flagged an error," Frank said, his tone rigid and emotionless. "Seat 2. A was double-booked. It's a rare technical glitch. We need you to move." Jordan did not answer immediately. He lifted his phone and showed his digital boarding pass. Then he presented the printed one. "Both issued yesterday. I checked in online exactly when the window opened. The seat assignment was locked from that moment." Frank blinked once, but nothing in his expression changed. "I understand. But the other passenger has a very high priority." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "I am Summit Premier Elite. I've flown more than 3 million miles with this airline." He looked directly at Frank. "There is no higher status than that." A moment of silence followed, long enough for Jordan to hear his own heartbeat. Frank avoided his eyes. A very bad sign. "For security reasons, I cannot disclose the details of the other passenger," Frank said each word, landing like a stone. "But you will need to vacate your seat." Emily bit her lip. Jordan noticed the shame and fear in her eyes, fear that left her unable to do anything except stand there. From the back came a loud groan, saturated with irritation. "Oh my God, what now? Do we want this plane to take off?" Or what? Jordan turned slightly. Tyler Briggs lounged in his seat, with his legs stretched out, as if he owned the entire cabin. Their eyes met for a single instant. One instant was enough for Jordan to understand this problem revolved around him. Frank continued, "We can move you to Premium Select Row 12B. It has plenty of space and is very comfortable. We'll refund the fare difference and give you a $500 voucher." $500. A meaningless sum to a man preparing to sign a $500 million contract the next day. So meaningless it was insulting. But the money was not what chilled Jordan. It was the disrespect. Disrespect delivered in a flat, procedural tone, but carrying an unspoken bias that had simmered beneath the surface for years. Jordan inhaled slowly, his dark brown eyes studying Frank like he was a malfunctioning machine. "You are telling me that I, an elite passenger with a confirmed seat assignment, must give up my seat for another passenger with supposedly higher priority, and that the system error is not real?" Emily held her breath. Jordan saw her hand tremble slightly, but Frank remained solid as stone. "We need your cooperation, sir." From behind Jordan, Tyler let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. "Come on, man, just take the other seat. Not everyone's used to sitting up here. They're trying to help you out. Don't make it a thing. Someone like you." The phrase was not spoken out loud this time, but Jordan heard it clearly in every syllable. It was in Tyler's eyes, in the disdain in his voice, in the way Frank refused to meet his gaze. Jordan felt his chest tighten, not from anger, but from exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had been through this scene 1,000 times in his life, and still had to watch it unfold in a place that was supposed to be fair. He lifted his head and looked directly at Frank. "I understand." And in that moment, he knew everything was about to change, not just for him, not just for Summit Skyways, but for the $500 million deal waiting for his signature. This flight, which he had sensed from the beginning would not be peaceful, had finally revealed its true face. And Jordan Reed, the man who always acted in silence, was preparing to make a decision that would shake the entire aviation industry. The moment Jordan looked directly at Frank Dalton, the cabin seemed to stop breathing. The hum of the engines outside the wing faded into the distance. The murmurs of the passengers behind them dissolved into nothing. Only 3 people remained at the center of the storm. Jordan, silent but sharp like a finely honed blade. Frank, rigid and exhausted inside the shell of policy, and Emily, her eyes shining as if caught between duty and conscience. Jordan spoke slowly each word, landing with the clarity of footsteps on an empty wooden floor. "Is that your final decision?" Frank straightened his spine, as though clinging to the last fragile thread of authority. "Yes. If you do not cooperate, I will have to call security to remove you from the aircraft. We cannot delay any longer." From behind them, Tyler Briggs leaned forward, his voice stretched out, as if inviting the whole cabin to enjoy the finale. "Oh, come on, man. What's the big deal? Just go to the seat in the back. 12B isn't bad for someone like you." Someone like you. Jordan did not need to hear more. His eyes drifted half shut, and in that instant, he saw his entire life laid out, the times he had been suspected when walking into luxury stores, the times he had been asked to show his ticket in VIP lines, despite having flown more than 3 million miles, the meetings where people looked at him as an exception, the countless reminders that he had to not cause trouble, just to be left in peace. Yet strangely, he was not angry. Not even a little. Only one thing spread through him, slowly and coldly: clarity. A clarity so sharp it steadied his heartbeat. He buttoned his suit jacket, a small gesture that felt like a knock on the door of destiny. "You do not need to call security." Jordan stood, each movement gentle to the point of being unsettling. "I'll leave on my own." Frank blinked in surprise before regaining his attempt at a neutral expression. Emily did not recover so easily. Her eyes widened, shimmering red. Mr. Reed Jordan slipped the book Meditations into his briefcase, placing a piece of his soul back where it belonged. He closed the zipper carefully, then looked up at Emily, his gaze soft, not blaming, only regretful. "It's all right," Jordan said quietly. His voice meant only for her. "I'm sorry you were put in this position." Just a small sentence, but enough to make her lips tremble. Because Jordan was not angry with her. He did not blame her. He did not threaten her. He simply understood her, and that more than any outburst tightened her chest. Behind him, Tyler let out a satisfied snort, like a man who believed his chess piece had landed exactly where he wanted it. Frank nodded stiffly. "Thank you for your cooperation." None of them knew this would become the most expensive thank you in the history of Summit Skyways. Jordan lifted his briefcase onto his shoulder, turned and walked slowly toward the cabin door. Each step echoed with a heavy resonance, not from defeat, but from the decision forming inside him, sharp and fully defined. As Jordan passed seat 2, B. Tyler turned his head and grinned so widely it was almost audible, the sound of arrogance cracking at the edges. "Good choice, bro. Next time, double-check your seat." Jordan paused for 1 second. He did not turn his head. He left only one line behind. "I hope you never become confident enough to believe you are the reason things happen." Tyler frowned, but Jordan was already moving forward. The cabin crew opened the door, a rush of cold air from the jet bridge sweeping inward. And as if drawing a final line under the opening act of this unfolding tragedy, Jordan stepped off the aircraft without looking back. When the door sealed shut behind him, Emily released a long, shaky breath as if escaping a crushing weight. But the cold in her chest only tightened. She knew this was wrong. Wrong enough that she wanted to scream, but she could not. She only stood there, her hands clenched until her knuckles turned white. Frank Dalton exhaled as well, relieved as though he had just handled a problem, unaware that this breath he took so casually was digging the grave for his career. Outside, Jordan walked down the jet bridge, eyes straight ahead. His steps were neither fast nor slow, simply calm, almost frighteningly calm. Marcus Aurelius echoed in his mind, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." But Jordan was not thinking about revenge. What he was thinking about was the system, a system whose darkest face he had just seen with complete clarity. When he returned to the gate area, the agent who had checked him in earlier stared in shock. "Mister, read what happened," Jordan answered in a tone so level it could cut through steel. "There was an issue with the seat. I chose to leave the aircraft." The agent's mouth fell open, but she did not have time to respond. Jordan had already walked past her, heading toward the lounge. Every step brought another thought, another piece, another data point, another conclusion taking shape. It was not about seat 2A, not about Tyler, not about Frank. It was about Summit Skyways, a partner preparing to sign a $500 million contract with him the next day. A partner willing to lie, using the phrase system error, willing to twist rules printed in their own manuals, willing to humiliate a loyal customer, to appease a loud, well-connected passenger. If they could do that over a first-class seat, what would they do with data, with protocols, with safety? With billions of data points, an AI logistics network depended on to function. The conclusion came to him, like a cold wind, swift, sharp, and certain. They could not be trusted. And in the world he built, where data was the soul of everything, the lack of trust was a slow but guaranteed death. When Jordan pushed open the door of the private conference room, inside the premium lounge, his eyes settled back into their familiar, terrifying calm. He set down his briefcase and unlocked his phone. Not to complain, not to rage, but to do what one of the most powerful CEOs in the tech industry could do, change everything. Back in first class, Emily stood with her shoulders collapsed, staring at the empty space of seat 2A, where only 5 minutes earlier, a calm, courteous man had been sitting, a man who absolutely did not deserve what had been done to him. She had no idea what was coming. She did not know that her silence would cost her many sleepless nights. And above all, she did not know that the man who had just walked off the plane was about to pull Summit Skyways into a storm no airline had ever faced. And it all began here, in the moment one man chose to stand up by walking away from the seat he deserved. Jordan stepped into the glass meeting room of the premium lounge as if he had been preparing for this moment his entire life. The sliding door sealed behind him, cutting him off from the boarding calls, the rush of travelers, and the first-class cabin that had just become the stage for a quiet but brutal confrontation. The air inside the small room was cold enough to freeze a breath, but Jordan's mind wasn't cold. It was burning, sharp, and terrifyingly clear. He set his briefcase on the table, pulled out a chair, and sat down. He did not lean back like a tired man. He did not run a hand through his hair like an angry man. He simply sat upright, his eyes fixed on the wooden surface, as if mapping out an invisible strategy. On the polished table, the overhead light reflected his silhouette, a 40-year-old black man with a calm face and eyes so steady they could unsettle anyone. Outside, Summit Skyways believed they had just handled an inconvenient passenger. They did not realize the man they pushed off the plane was the one holding the future of their airline between his fingers. Jordan unlocked his phone. A line of notifications filled the corner of the screen, emails from legal messages from the Skynet project team, the appointment reminder for his contract signing with Summit's CEO the next day at noon. All of it slipped past his eyes as he navigated to one name, Olivia Grant, his executive assistant, the heartbeat coordinator of Horizon Logic Systems. Her phone rang twice before her voice cut in crisp, quick, and metallic. Jordan, did something change in your schedule? You should be on your flight right now. I left the aircraft, Jordan said, his voice so flat that Olivia fell silent immediately. There was an issue with the seat. They asked me to leave first class. On the other end, Olivia drew a sharp breath, but she did not ask why or what happened. She knew Jordan, deeply. She knew that if he called the moment he stepped off a plane, the problem was far bigger than a seat assignment. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady, as if ready to pick up a sword for him. "Cancel tomorrow's meeting with William Briggs." The soft clicking of keys echoed faintly. "Understood. What reason should I list?" "No reason," Jordan replied, each word cold as steel. "Just inform them the meeting is cancelled, and all further communication must go through legal." Olivia paused for a few seconds, not out of hesitation, but because she understood the magnitude of what he had just decided. "All right," she said. "I'll take care of it." Next, Jordan continued, his eyes fixed on his reflection in the glass wall. "Call the legal team. Tell them to send a termination notice for the letter of intent with Summit Skyways. Cite the violation of core values in the preliminary agreement. They'll know what part I'm referring to." Olivia didn't ask for clarification. She did not need it. "I'll have it sent within 10 minutes. Jordan gave a small nod, even though she couldn't see him. "Last thing. Book the earliest flight to Chicago. Any airline except Summit." Olivia almost exhaled a laugh at the irony, but the situation was too heavy. "I'll book Pacifica Airways. Different terminal. I'll send you the details right after." Jordan ended the call. 1 minute. Only a few sentences. But he had just done something CEOs usually agonized over for months. He had just killed a $500 million deal with the same tone one used to order a morning coffee. Not out of pride, not out of ego, but because of data. Jordan stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the runway. A Summit Boeing 787 was being fueled. The tail logo gleamed under the sun, a symbol of prestige, scale, and a 30-year empire. He stared at the aircraft for a long time. Long enough to imagine the lines of AI code Horizon had written the flight optimization models, the load prediction algorithms, all of it waiting to be integrated into Summit's system if he signed tomorrow. But then he remembered Frank Dalton's face when he said double-booked. The dismissive shrug, the coldness wrapped in the word policy. Tyler's voice. Someone like you. Jordan released a long breath. Not a breath of anger, a breath of resolve. How can I trust an AI system to be truthful when the people behind the airline live by lies? He couldn't. He never would. A soft chime sounded a message from Olivia. Pacifica Airways, Flight 273 Gate G19. Your car is on its way to Terminal B. I've cancelled all summit meetings and sent the termination letter. Jordan looked at the message and locked the screen. Everything was done. No shouting. No accusations. Just a precise, cold, absolute decision. The conference room door opened with a soft metallic click as Jordan pushed it, a sound like the final exhale of Summit Skyways before the storm hit. He stepped out calm as though he hadn't just altered the fate of an entire airline. Inside Summit Flight 451, Emily Carter stood frozen. She stared at the empty seat 2A, her heart heavy as stone. She knew Jordan had been right to leave, but that truth carved a wound in her chest she could not explain. And she knew something even more frightening inside that cabin. She was the only one who felt this was wrong. The other passengers, they saw only a man switching seats. Frank. He saw a task completed. Tyler. He saw a victory. Only Emily felt guilt. And she had no idea that this feeling would make her the spark that ignited the biggest explosion Summit Skyways had ever faced. Meanwhile, the man pushed out of first class walked across the stone floor of LAX, each step laying down a piece of Summit's fate. And in his mind, one sentence rang as clearly as a bronze bell. They chose the wrong man to test, because some people, when underestimated, do not raise their voices. They flip the entire board, and Jordan Reed was exactly that kind of man. On the 38th floor of Summit Skyways headquarters in Atlanta, where glass walls looked straight down at a city racing beneath them, CEO William Briggs walked with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to touch a miracle. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his navy suit tailored to perfection, and his smile carried the arrogance of someone who had just received the best news of the year, a $500 million contract that would save the airline from years of financial decline. Martha, he called, his voice loud and certain. Is the champagne ready? The Dom Perignon. His assistant Martha, a slender woman with sharp black glasses, nodded. Yes, sir, it has been chilled since morning. The press is also waiting for your statement, so they can release it by noon tomorrow. William smirked, pride flashing in his eyes. He imagined shareholders applauding the stock market, leaping upward, the media calling him the man who saved Summit. Just one more step, one small step, one signature. And then his desk phone rang the urgent tone, slicing clean through his triumphant daydream. It was the high-priority internal line, used only for corporate emergencies. William picked up. Briggs speaking. Sir, you need to see this, said David Cross, head of legal, his voice tight. We just received a termination notice from Horizon Logic Systems. William froze. For half a second, he genuinely believed he misheard. What they terminated, the letter of intent. Effective immediately. Impossible. Sent by mistake. Who sent it? Their legal team. Proper format. Electronic signature verified. William felt the blood inside him turn to ice. His eyes widened. What reason? David hesitated for a moment, as if searching for a softer phrasing, but finally delivered the truth. Violation of core values. William nearly threw the pen in his hand. Nonsense. We didn't do anything. Horizon hasn't reported any issue at all. The notice was sent precisely at the time. David drew a breath, his voice dropping at the time Jordan Reed was supposed to be on flight 451 to Chicago this morning. Every muscle in William's body locked up. Jordan Reed. Yes, the CEO of Horizon, the key partner in the $500 million deal. He was a passenger on Flight 451. Yes. And David swallowed hard, his voice trembling, and he was marked in Frank Dalton's report as uncooperative after his first-class seat was double-booked. A silent explosion tore through William's mind. His knees nearly buckled. Bring me the manifest from that flight. Now. 2 minutes later, Martha rushed in with a tablet. William snatched it from her hands and scrolled through the passenger list. 2 names hit him like a punch to the chest. Jordan Reed, 2A. Tyler Briggs, 2B. The entire world tilted. He collapsed into his chair, his hand trembling as it covered his mouth. Tyler, his only nephew. The boy he spoiled, protected, and placed on the airline's VIP list for no reason other than bloodline. And this morning, that boy had taken seat 2B, a seat that was never his. Worse, he had caused a black man, an elite passenger, a loyal customer, and the partner holding Summit's fate to be thrown off the plane. No, 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 William whispered like a man watching the home he built for 3 decades crumble brick by brick. But the disaster had only begun. Frank Dalton's report appeared on the screen. System error. Double booked. Passenger J. Reed uncooperative. Flight delayed 22 minutes. Not a single line mentioning Tyler the cause of everything. Not a single line mentioning discrimination. Not a single line mentioning that the crew bent the rules for the CEO's nephew. My God. William gasped. They covered it up. They covered it up to protect him. Martha stared at him, pale. Sir, if this goes public, no. William cut her off, his voice cracking. It already is public. Reed cancelling the deal, that's the signal. He shot to his feet, voice dropping into a low, furious growl. Get Tyler in here. Now. 5 minutes later, Tyler Briggs strolled in. Cheerful, his hair slicked back, his expression carefree enough to make William want to break something. Uncle Rich, perfect timing. I was about to call you. This morning's service was actually great, you know. There was this guy causing prob. Shut up! William roared, the sound hitting the walls like thunder. Tyler froze, jaw hanging open. William hurled the tablet at his chest. That guy, William said through clenched teeth, is the man who just cancelled a $500 million contract with me. Tyler's face went ghost white. WWW what? But I didn't know, What did you do to him? I just wanted the window seat, they said. There was a system error. I didn't know who he was. William slammed his palm on the table, the impact making Martha flinch. It doesn't matter who he was. It doesn't matter what his job is. All it takes is 1 ounce of respect. And you treated him like garbage. And the crew did the same. Now what? He walks away from Summit. And Summit will die with him. Tyler stumbled backward, eyes filling with panic. I'm sorry. But I thought you would. I am not going to spend my life cleaning up your messes. William shouted, his voice tearing out of him like it belonged to someone else. You just burned this company down, and now I have to sift through the ashes. The air in the room grew thick enough to slice. Tyler shook so hard he nearly collapsed into a chair. And William, the man once nicknamed the King of Turnarounds, slumped back down in the most shattered state Martha had ever seen. He buried his face in both hands. He aged 10 years in a matter of minutes. Martha, he muttered, his voice hoarse. Prepare an internal announcement. Frank Dalton is suspended immediately. Tyler, he glanced at his nephew with eyes colder than steel, is banned from flying on any Summit aircraft from this moment forward. Tyler opened his mouth to plead, but William waved him off like a fly. Get out. Tyler stumbled away, looking like a man walking to a life sentence. When the door shut behind him, William rose again, inhaled deeply, and spoke a sentence Martha would never forget. Prepare for the worst. We just lost the only man who could save Summit. And somewhere thousands of miles from Atlanta, Jordan Reed rolled his suitcase toward Terminal B, unaware that his silent decision had sent shockwaves across the entire aviation industry. People often say, a storm can begin with the flap of a butterfly's wings. But today, a single choice to walk away from a first-class seat was enough to drown an entire empire. On the runways of LAX, the midday sun poured down on rows of aircraft lined up like a giant army of metal. Jordan Reed pulled his suitcase toward Terminal B, his steps steady his expression, holding that same unnerving calm. He was not rushing, not dragging his feet. He walked as if he knew that every step he placed onto the polished airport floor was an invisible blade cutting deeper into the future of Summit Skyways. And that was exactly what was happening. As Jordan passed through the glass doors of Terminal B, the phone in William Briggs's pocket on the 38th floor of Summit's Atlanta headquarters buzzed again and again, like a death knell. He tried to steady himself, but his hands continued to shake. He had just thrown Tyler out of his office and stripped away every VIP privilege he had ever granted him, but that was only internal punishment. Something far more terrifying stood ahead: survival or collapse. The desk phone rang, and David Cross shouted through the speaker, "Sir, I've tried calling Jordan Reed 8 times, all rejected." William closed his eyes and drew a breath like a man being pushed underwater. Contact his assistant, Olivia Grant. I tried. She said only 3 words, "Contact legal," then hung up. A sharp click echoed inside William's chest like a bolt sliding shut from the outside. He jumped to his feet. "Connect me to Jordan directly, now. No assistant, no intermediaries." David hesitated. "Sir, that could be considered a procedural violation." "I do not care," William roared. "Call him." And David obeyed. The system dialed Jordan's direct line, a number William had fought months to obtain through negotiation and relationship building. The ringing began steady and cold, like a countdown to disaster. Jordan stepped into the Pacifica Airways section. The phone was still buzzing in his pocket. He glanced at the screen. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Then he switched it off. He did not answer. A simple choice. But in Atlanta, it was the final hammer strike on Summit Skyway's foundation. He refused. William asked, his voice so hoarse it barely carried sound. "Yes, sir." He declined the call. With no other options left, William clenched his fist, released it, then clenched it again. "Call again. One more time." This time the phone was picked up, just not by Jordan. Olivia Grant speaking. Her voice was sharp and composed like cold steel. Ms. Grant, William said, trying to keep his tone polite. "I need to speak with Jordan immediately. There's been a serious misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Olivia cut in, her tone so icy that even David, standing beside William, shivered. Summit Skyways violated the core value clause of the LOI. "Mr. Reed has no further obligation to your company. You don't understand. William nearly begged. This was the mistake of one employee, and Mr. Briggs Olivia said slowly each word, hitting like a nail into a wall. Mr. Reed understands very clearly that what happened this morning was not a mistake, and he knows this is not the first time. What William gasped, "What are you talking about? Summit System," Olivia said, "is rotten from the inside." Mr. Reed does not work with corporations that allow discrimination disguised as system errors. His decision is final. I need to meet him. I will fly to Chicago right now. There is no need, Olivia replied as calmly as if reading a weather report. Mr. Reed will not meet with you. All communication from this moment forward will be handled by legal. Then she hung up. No pause, no courtesy, no hope. On the 38th floor, William stood motionless, the phone slipping from his hand onto the desk. He could not recall how long he remained like that. Martha watched him, fear and confusion in her eyes. So what do we do now? William collapsed into his chair, like a man watching his life's work burn to the ground. He swallowed hard. We've lost Jordan Reed. We've lost the contract. And we're about to lose much more. Meanwhile, at Terminal B, Jordan sat in a Pacifica Airways waiting area, reopened Meditations, and read without emotion. But in his mind, one truth echoed with absolute clarity. If they cannot treat a passenger correctly, they cannot be trusted with critical data. And I will not place my company's future in the hands of people like that. Next to him, travelers chatted unwrapped snacks, scrolled on their phones, completely unaware that a few feet away, a calm man in a grey suit was quietly dismantling an empire. A notification appeared. Pacifica Airways invites passenger Jordan Reed to board at gate G19. He closed the book, stood and straightened his tie with a ritualistic motion. At that exact moment in Atlanta, David Cross burst into William's office, white as chalk. "Sir, something happened. The stock is dropping. How much more than 10% and still falling? A 10% plunge in minutes, Wall Street's slap across the face. And that was only the beginning. The markets always understand what insiders have not yet processed." At LAX, Jordan stepped through the boarding gate for Pacifica Airways. The flight attendant smiled. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Reed." He returned a politer nod and took his seat, 1A a seat. No one challenged, no one questioned, no one tried to steal with a lie. A moment of peace. But this was not the end. It was the quiet before the media storm, the stock market storm, and the accountability storm that would strike Summit Skyways. Because as Jordan fastened his seatbelt, the trembling airline in Atlanta was about to discover that what happened this morning was not an incident. It was a verdict. A verdict Jordan never needed to say out loud. And Summit Skyways, the airline once proud of its premium service, was about to pay for the arrogance of judging human worth by appearance. As the Pacifica Airways jet lifted its wheels off the ground, leaving Los Angeles beneath a blanket of white clouds, Jordan closed his eyes and relaxed. No anger, no regret, only correctness. And that correctness was the force that would sink Summit Skyways. As the Pacifica Airways jet lifted away from Los Angeles, Jordan Reed rested his head against the seat in 1A, his eyes closing as if seeking a moment of quiet after a morning filled with turbulence. But deep inside his mind, everything was painfully clear. Cancelling the contract with Summit Skyways was not an impulsive reaction from a man who felt insulted. It was the conclusion of a founder who had built the entire Horizon Logic Systems empire on one foundation: trust in people and trust in truth. And this morning, Summit Skyways had shattered both. Yet while Jordan drifted into a state of calm meditation, thousands of miles away in Long Beach, Emily Carter sat on the living room floor, her back pressed against the wall, her hands covering her head. Her small apartment sat in the dimming afternoon light, but her mind was drowning in a darkness much deeper. The incident that happened only hours earlier felt like it had happened a year ago. The image of Jordan rising from seat 2, remained engraved in her memory. The image of his calm eyes that carried an invisible blade made her chest twist, and his words, the one thing she never wanted to hear, echoed in her mind. "I'm sorry you were put in that position." It was not comfort. It was acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that she was the person trapped between conscience and survival. Acknowledgement that she stayed silent while the truth was twisted right in front of her. Frank Dalton, who hid behind policy to force a passenger out of his rightful seat, was probably enjoying a pleasant lunch break at that very moment. Tyler Briggs, who believed the world revolved around him, was likely still thrilled about his hollow victory. Only Emily, the one who had witnessed everything, was struggling with the crushing weight of feeling like a traitor. She stood up abruptly and walked to the cabinet where she kept her employee handbook. She opened the first page. The word integrity was printed in bold right beside respect and inclusion. Words she once believed in. Believed in so deeply that she was proud of her job. But today they looked like knife marks carved into paper, beautiful but completely untrue. Emily let out a cracked laugh, then slammed the handbook shut. No, she could not allow this to be buried. Summit Skyways would cover it up. HR would excuse it. Dalton would be protected by seniority. Tyler would continue to be shielded because he carried the Briggs name, and Jordan, the actual victim, would be the only person no one would care about beyond his appearance. But he didn't fight back. He did not make a scene. He did not need to shout to be understood. He simply stood up and let his silence punish the entire system. And that made it impossible for Emily to remain silent. She opened her phone. In her contacts were only a few names, friends, co-workers, her mother, but none of them were the right people to tell. She needed someone outside Summit, someone unbound, someone willing to face the truth, and one name appeared in her mind. Daniel Price, investigative journalist for the Wall Street Ledger, famous for exposés on toxic corporate culture. Emily had watched a documentary he produced in which he revealed a hidden caste system in the hospitality industry. Now she found herself standing at the center of something just like it. Her fingers trembled as she opened a secure messaging app. Should she send a message or stay silent? Should she risk her entire career to protect a man whose name she barely knew? But then Jordan's image flashed before her. The way he said, "I'm sorry you were put in that position." No blame, no anger, just understanding. Understanding that forced her to confront herself. She closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and began typing. "My name is Emily Carter. I am a first-class flight attendant with Summit Skyways. I was present during the incident this morning on Flight 451. She paused. Her chest tightened. But remembering Jordan's eyes, she continued. What happened is not what the internal report says. It was not a system error. It was favoritism, disrespect, and prejudice. The passenger who was removed from his seat was Jordan Reed. She attached her employee ID photo proof she was not lying. Then she pressed send. A small check mark appeared. The message was delivered. Emily exhaled, as if a boulder had finally been lifted off her chest. Elsewhere in the sky, the Pacifica Airways aircraft glided through a layer of clouds, sunlight casting a warm golden stripe across the page of Jordan's book. He had no idea Emily, the young flight attendant with haunted eyes, had just altered the entire trajectory of this story. And not just altered it. She had just lit the fuse to a bomb Summit Skyways could never contain. But the storm had not arrived yet. It was only gathering strength above the horizon. Emily set her phone on the table, her hands trembling. She did not know what would happen to her. Termination, a lawsuit, being blacklisted across the industry, all possible. Every outcome was possible. But at that moment, she felt something she had never felt in her 3 years as a flight attendant, freedom. She had done the right thing, even if it cost her everything. And on the 38th floor of Summit Skyways headquarters, just hours from now, William Briggs would learn that the empire he was desperately trying to hold together had been pushed straight into the center of a media firestorm by a single message. A storm Jordan did not start, but a storm Summit had created, because they did not understand that some people stay silent, not because they are weak, but because they are waiting for the right moment to speak the truth, and that truth had just been sent. Straight to the one man capable of turning it into a national reckoning. Summit Skyways had no idea that a single ordinary first-class attendant had just done what even Jordan himself didn't do, transform one man's mistreatment into a revolution for the entire aviation industry. And this was the moment Summit, without realizing it, stepped onto a path with no way back. The sky above Chicago carried a soft gray hue, the late afternoon sunlight falling over O'Hare Airport with the gentle hesitation of a day preparing to close. The Pacifica Airways jet touched down smoothly, gliding across the runway, as if skating over water. In first class, Jordan Reed opened his eyes, as though returning from a dreamless sleep, heavy with thought. He gathered his book, adjusted his suit jacket, and stepped off the plane with the composed air of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and exactly why. What he did not know was that as he walked away with his small suitcase, a violent storm had already begun forming, born from the message Emily Carter sent only hours earlier. Daniel Price, investigative journalist for the Wall Street Ledger, received Emily's message at 3:17 in the afternoon. The moment he reached the name Jordan Reed, his eyes narrowed, not in surprise but in recognition of how serious this was. Jordan Reed was not just the CEO of Horizon Logic Systems. He was the symbol of a new era in logistics and artificial intelligence, a man respected quietly by politicians and industry giants alike. If what she's saying is true, Daniel thought Summit didn't just mistreat a passenger, they just shattered their own future. He replied immediately, asking for verification. And Emily, summoning a level of courage she never knew she possessed, initiated a video call and retold the entire incident with no hesitation, no hiding, no omissions. Daniel recorded everything, every detail, every tremor in her voice, every flicker of guilt in her eyes when she recalled the words, "someone like you." It wasn't just a statement. It was the vivid confession of a witness who had seen both the truth and the injustice. Meanwhile, Jordan left the airport and settled into the black car Olivia had arranged. The driver greeted him with a simple, sincere respect, something he had not been given on his Summit flight that morning. Jordan didn't need Wei-Fei, didn't need to open emails, didn't need news updates. He simply watched the streets of Chicago drift past the window, his mind as still as moonlit water. He had made his decision. and he had no regrets. At the same time, in the Wall Street Ledger office in New York, Daniel Price began typing the opening lines of the investigation. His fingers flew across the keyboard as if racing against time, but each word was as sharp as a blade. The headline read, "First Class Lowest Values Summit. Skyways faces ethical collapse after losing $500 million deal over a seat." He described each moment of the incident, from Tyler Briggs's arrogance to Frank Dalton's cold tone, from the helplessness in Emily's eyes to Jordan's silence, a silence more powerful than any protest. He quoted Emily word for word. It wasn't a system error. It was human error. And the biggest error wasn't in the computer, but in the hearts of the people who believed they had the right to decide someone else's worth. When the editorial system completed its final check, the editor-in-chief, who had seen countless scandals in his career, looked at Daniel and said, "This article is going to shake the entire industry." Daniel replied, "Not the article. The actions from this morning." By 7 in the evening, the piece went live, and within 3 minutes it began to spread. On social media, outrage ignited like gasoline catching flame. "I can't believe a major airline would do this. If they treat Jordan Reed like that, imagine how they treat regular passengers. Summit Skyways deserves to be boycotted." The hashtag Boycott Summit exploded in under 30 minutes. The video of Emily telling her story with trembling voice, posted on TikTok by Daniel, at her request reached millions by nightfall. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfectly filmed. But it was true. Raw, honest, painful. And its imperfections made people believe it even more. Summit Skyways stock, which had dipped earlier in the afternoon, officially plummeted in after-hours trading. Financial forums erupted. Summit just shot itself in the foot. If they disrespect a $500 million partner, how can they be trusted with data? This is proof of a rotten culture. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Emily was trembling with fear. The threats from co-workers had already started. HR was calling non-stop. Her direct supervisor demanded she stop this reckless behavior immediately. But as Emily watched her own video spread across the internet, read tens of thousands of comments supporting her, she felt something she had never felt in her 3 years of working. She had a voice. In Chicago, Jordan walked with Professor Ellis along an old stone path on the university campus. The evening breeze rustled through the ancient trees, creating a deep, warm whisper, like time speaking to them. "I heard about what happened," the professor said, his voice raspy but firm. "Everyone has." Jordan frowned lightly, though not surprised. "I didn't try to make it spread." "I know," the professor nodded, "but the things that must be seen always find their way to the light." Jordan was quiet for a moment, then said Summit didn't fail because of one bad decision. They failed because their culture allowed it to happen. The professor looked at him with gentle but piercing eyes. "And you did what many people don't dare to do. You refused to cooperate with something wrong, even when going along would have been easier." Jordan stopped walking. The Chicago air grew still. In the distance, a train horn blended with the rising evening wind. He spoke slowly. "I only did what was right for Horizon. I didn't expect it to create a wave this big. Right decisions often create big waves," the professor replied. "And the people afraid of waves are the ones who never change anything." When Jordan lifted his eyes, the first lights of the Chicago night flickered on, and in Atlanta, in the 38th floor conference room, Summit Skyways was in full-blown panic as they watched their stock plummet and the media tear apart what was left of their reputation. The storm had formed, and nothing could stop it now. Not when the truth had been spoken. Not when the whole world was watching. Not when one silent act from Jordan Reed had become thunder, striking the rotten heart of an empire. And this was only the beginning. Before the sun had even fully risen, Summit Skyways had already entered a state of collapse. Its stock price plunged uncontrollably, wiping out more than $1.2 billion in value in a single morning. News outlets across the country declared it the greatest ethical disaster in the history of commercial aviation. William Briggs was dragged into an emergency board meeting, facing directors so furious they could not sit still, each one hammering him with accusations and demands for explanation. His apologies meant nothing the moment the screen lit up with Emily's video recounting everything, and beside it, the investigative article exposing the truth in detail. Investors fled. Customers cancelled their tickets in waves. The customer service lines crashed entirely under the volume of complaints. Summit did not just lose a $500 million contract, they lost trust, reputation, and everything they had built over 30 years. Meanwhile, Jordan Reed walked into a conference room at Pacifica Airways with quiet composure. His expression was not that of a man reveling in victory, but that of someone who understood that justice doesn't always arrive with shouting, it often arrives through consequences. And Summit Skyways was now paying for the lesson they chose to ignore. 6 months later, Summit Skyways officially disappeared from American skies, swallowed by a larger airline for a price so low it became a punchline in investment circles. William Briggs was forced to resign in silence, while Tyler Briggs became the national symbol of reckless privilege, branded by the media as the spark that ignited a $500 million collapse. Emily Carter, though fired by Summit for violating her non-disclosure agreement, was invited by Pacifica Airways to join as an ethics and customer experience reform advisor, becoming a voice for decency across the aviation industry. And Jordan Reed, the man who quietly walked away from Seat 2A that morning, continued building Horizon Logic Systems upon the values he had always held: never collaborate with what is wrong. The new contract with Pacifica, though smaller, became a model for the entire industry, an example of how companies can be built on trust and human dignity. The story of Flight 451 became a modern legend, proof that sometimes a single moment of silence is enough to transform an entire industry. And Jordan's silence had done exactly that. From the perspective of a specialist in corporate culture and ethical leadership, this story reveals a profound truth. Organizations do not collapse because of one monumental mistake, but because of the small deviations they allow to grow unchecked every single day. Summit Skyways did not lose everything because of one first-class seat, but because it forgot that human dignity is always the most valuable asset a company can possess. Jordan's power did not come from wealth, but from his unwavering commitment to what is right, even when that choice was strong enough to shake an entire empire. If you believe that ethical values are still worth protecting in the modern world, make sure to like and subscribe to join us for more stories that speak to the core of what it means to be human. And before you leave the video, drop a short comment, no more than 3 words: honor human dignity.